This presentation covers Chapter 2 of Evidence-Based School Counseling by Dimmitt, Carey, and Hatch. The chapter is titled Data-Based Decision-Making, Knowing What Needs to be Addressed. The main idea is that counselors need to use data to define problems clearly before choosing interventions. This prevents wasted effort, ensures interventions match real student needs, and helps us demonstrate measurable results. Data matters. One of the major points of Chapter 2 is that data connects school counseling to larger school improvement efforts. Without data, we may act on assumptions or intuition, which risks misidentifying student needs. The authors warn about the ready, fire, aim approach, where interventions are launched before the actual problem is clarified. By starting with data, we can see whether the real problem is attendance, academics, or behavior. This allows us to design interventions that actually fit the issue. It also helps us show measurable results, which is important when we need to demonstrate the value of counseling to administrators, teachers, and parents. Steps in data-based decision-making. The chapter outlines a simple but powerful model for data-based decision-making. First, we must define the problem using data sources like grades, attendance, or behavior referrals. Next, we set measurable goals, SMART goals that specify exactly what improvement is expected and when it should be achieved. Once the goal is set, we design interventions that address the true root cause, not just surface symptoms. The fourth step is to implement with fidelity, meaning that the intervention is carried out consistently and as planned. Finally, we monitor progress and evaluate the outcomes. This cycle keeps our work systematic and makes sure we know whether our efforts are effective. Case example: Sheila's detentions. The case really illustrates why data is critical. Sheila was an 8th grader who was constantly receiving detentions. At first, the assumption was that these were conduct problems, so the counselor thought she needed behavior interventions. But when the counselor looked at the data, they discovered that 70% of Sheila's detentions were actually for missing homework, not misconduct. This completely changed the approach. Instead of behavior management, Sheila received academic support through a homework club and tutoring. The result was powerful: her detentions dropped by 55%. This example shows us that assumptions can be misleading, and only data can reveal the true nature of a problem. Enabling conditions for data use. For counselors to use data effectively, certain conditions have to be in place. First, we need access to reliable data systems that include attendance, academic records, and behavior referrals. Second, collaboration is essential. We can't do this work alone. Teachers, administrators, and families all play roles in both identifying the problem and supporting the solution. Third, time is critical. Counselors often get pulled into clerical tasks or administrative duties, which makes it hard to focus on data analysis and intervention planning. Roles may need to be redefined so that counselors have the time to do this work. Finally, counselors can step into leadership roles, leading data teams and showing others how evidence can guide school improvement. Fieldwork connections. When we think about applying this model in practicum or fieldwork, data is often the first step in targeting support. Attendance data helps us identify students with chronic absenteeism, which often connects to lower achievement. Behavior referrals can be broken down to see whether issues are academic, like missing work, or conduct-related, like classroom disruptions. Academic records, such as D, F lists or midterm grades, show us which students are struggling and might need tutoring or small group support. Once patterns are clear, counselors can design small groups, classroom guidance lessons, or individual interventions that directly respond to the data. This process is universal, so it can be applied at nearly any school site. This activity puts the chapter's lessons into practice. Imagine your school has 60 weekly detentions in grade 8. What would your first step be? Some people might jump into anger management groups or peer mediation, assuming that the problem is conflict or misbehavior. But unless we look at the data, we don't actually know the cause. Maybe the detentions are mostly for tardiness, or incomplete homework, or something else entirely. The correct first step is always to define the problem with data. Once we know the real cause, we can match the intervention appropriately. Just like in Sheila's case, data helps us avoid wasting time and ensures the solution addresses the real issue. All of the information in this presentation comes from Chapter 2 of Evidence-Based School Counseling by Dimmitt, Carey, and Hatch. This text emphasizes how evidence-based practices can make counseling programs more effective and accountable. The book argues that when counselors use data, they not only improve student outcomes but also strengthen the role of counseling within the school by showing its measurable impact.